The somatosensory system is sometimes considered in two parts. The general senses include those such as touch, temperature, vibration, proprioception, and others, and the so-called special senses, which include vision, hearing, balance, taste, and olfaction. In this unit, we will discuss the special senses beginning with the visual system. Humans are very visually oriented. Vision is our dominant sense. About 70% of all the sensory receptors in the body are located in the eyes, and almost half of the cerebral cortex is involved in some aspect of visual processing. Recall from our study of the brain that the occipital lobe was almost exclusively involved with vision, perception, and interpretation of images. The eye is a very highly specialized sensory organ. It consists of a sphere that not only contains the first, second, and third order neurons of the visual pathway, but is exquisitely designed to capture and focus light. For the eye to be effective as a key sensory organ, there are a number of accessory structures that serve to keep the eye clean and protected. We will begin our discussion with these.
The accessory structures of the eye include the lacrimal apparatus, eyelids, conjunctiva, a number of glands, and 6 extrinsic eye muscles. The eyebrows consist of short coarse hairs that help shade the eyes from sunlight, prevent sweat from dripping down the forehead and into the eyes, and will aid in keeping larger particles from reaching the eye. The eyelids or palpebrae protect the eyes and help keep them from drying out. The eyelids also have hairs that protect debris from entering the eye and obstructing vision or harming the cornea. The follicles of the eyelashes are supplied by many sensory receptors so that anything that touches the eyelashes, even a puff of air, triggers reflexive blinking. The space between the upper and lower lids is called the palpebral fissure. The lids meet laterally and medially at the angles called commissures. The medial commissure has a fleshy elevation called the lacrimal caruncle that contains sebaceous and sweat glands and produces a whitish secretion commonly known as Sandman's eye sand, which collects at the medial commissure especially while one is sleeping. The eyelids are covered by some of the thinnest skin found in the body, but are supported internally by connective tissue called the tarsal plates. The tarsal plates serve as an anchoring point for the orbicularis oculi and the levator palpebrae superioris muscles. The eyelid muscles are activated reflexively to cause blinking every 3 to 7 seconds, which helps prevent drying of the eyes. This is because each time we blink, secretions from the various glands, oil, mucus, tears, are spread across the surface of the eye. Tarsal or meibomian glands are embedded in the tarsal plates. Their ducts open at the edge of the eyelids. Tarsal glands are modified sebaceous glands that secrete oil, preventing the eyelids from sticking together. At the base of the hair follicles of the eyelashes, are another type of sebaceous glands called ciliary or Z's glands. When these glands get blocked by oil, a red sty develops. The conjunctiva is a transparent mucous membrane lining the eyelids, palpebral conjunctive. And the anterior surface of the eyeball, bulbar conjunctiva. The bulbar conjunctiva covers the white of the eye, not the clear cornea. Because the conjunctiva is extremely thin, the blood vessels underneath it are visible, especially when the eye is irritated. We refer to this condition as bloodshot eyes. Sometimes the conjunctiva gets inflamed, reddened and irritated, resulting in a condition called conjunctivitis. Sometimes the conjunctiva becomes infected with bacteria or viruses, resulting in pink eye. Pink eye is highly contagious. The lacrimal apparatus consists of the lacrimal gland and a system of ducts that drain lacrimal fluid or tears into the nasal cavity. The lacrimal gland sits in the upper lateral part of the orbit and can be seen through the palpebral conjunctiva when the eyelid is pulled out and rolled up, i.e. everted. Tears produced by the gland are released into the superior part of the conjunctival sac through several small excretory ducts. Blinking spreads the tears downward and across the eye medially to the medial commissure. From here the tears enter 2 tiny openings called the lacrimal puncta and drain into 2 small canals called the lacrimal canaliculi. The tears enter the lacrimal sac and enter the nasal cavity via the nasolacrimal duct, which opens into the inferior meatus. Tears consist of a dilute saline solution which also contains mucus, antibodies, and lysozyme, an enzyme that destroys bacterial. The tears protect the surface of the eye by keeping it clean, moist and lubricate. D. Secretion of tears is mediated by parasympathetic fibers in cranial nerve 7. The extrinsic eye muscles work together to adjust the position of the eyeball in such a way as to ensure that the image of what we are trying to look at is properly aligned with the optical components of the eyes. They allow us to follow a moving object and provide external support that helps to maintain the shape of the eyeball and hold it in the orbit. The extrinsic eye muscles originate from the bony orbit and insert into the outer surface of the eyeball. There are 4 rectus muscles, inferior, superior, medial and lateral, that originate from a common tendinous ring or annulus at the back of the orbit. These muscles move the eyeball straight up, straight down, laterally and medially. In addition, there are 2 oblique muscles which serve to rotate the eye somewhat. The superior oblique muscle originates from the annular ring with the rectus muscles, runs along the medial wall of the orbit, and then makes a right angle turn and passes through a fibrocartilaginous loop suspended in the frontal bone. The loop is called the trochlea, which is a word that means pulley. Cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve, which innervates the superior oblique, is named after the trochlea. The superior oblique inserts on the superolateral aspect of the eyeball. It rotates the eye downward and laterally. The inferior oblique originates from the medial orbit and runs laterally and obliquely to insert on the inferolateral surface of the eye. It rotates the eye up and laterally. The extrinsic eye muscles are precisely and rapidly controlled reflexing eye-axon to muscle fiber ration. The motor units of these muscles contain only 8 to 12 muscle cells and in some cases only 2 or 3. This table summarizes the action and nerve innervation of the 6 extrinsic eye muscles. Notice that 4 out of the 6 are innervated by cranial nerve 3, the oculomotor, that's how the nerve got its name, motor to the oculus. The superior oblique is innervated by cranial nerve 4, the trochlear nerve, and as stated previously is named after the trochlea. The lateral rectus is innervated by cranial nerve 5, the abducens, so named because this muscle moves the eye laterally or abducts the eye. We will now consider the eyeball itself. The average human eye has a diameter of about 2.5 centimeters or 1 inch. It is divided into poles, anterior and posterior, because the eye is roughly globe-shaped. The outer wall of the eyeball consists of 3 layers or tunics, which will be discussed in detail in the next slide. In this lateral view of the eye, the clear bulge is the cornea, and the white of the eye is called the sclera. Internally, the eye is subdivided into an anterior segment which is subdivided by the iris into anterior and posterior chambers. These chambers contain a fluid called the aqueous humor. The iris is the colored part of the eye and the pupil is the opening in the iris. Directly behind the iris is the lens, which is suspended in the posterior chamber from the ciliary body by tiny filaments called the suspensory ligament or ciliary zonule. The ciliary body and suspensory ligaments play a key role in our ability to focus on objects at various distances away. The post-Reyer segment is the largest part of the eyeball. It contains a clear, gel-like material called the vitreous humor, or sometimes the vitreous body. The vitreous humor has the consistency of a jellyfish. It supports the shape of the eyeball from the inside, preventing shape changes in the globe when the eye muscles contract. The optic nerve leaves the back of the eye to course through the optic canal on its way to structures in the brain. Notice that there is blood vessels running down the center of the nerve. The central artery brings blood to the retina, and the central vein drains it. Where the optic nerve leaves the eye is an area called the optic disc. There are now photoreceptors in the optic disc, so it is functionally a blind spot. Notice that the retina covers all the back of the eye and extends around the globe until it meets the ciliary body. The junction of the retina with the ciliary body is called the ora serrata. In the back of the eye there is a tiny region called the macula lutea. We will learn later on that the macula lutea contains a small volcano-shaped region called the fovea centralis. This is the area of our greatest high acuity vision. It contains only photoreceptors called cones. The wall of the eye consists of 3 layers or tunics, the fibrous tunic, the uvea or vascular tunic, and the sensory tunic. The outer fibrous tunic consists of the sclera and cornea. The sclera, which means hard, is white and opaque and very tough. It protects and maintains the shape of the eyeball, and is the site for attachment of the extrinsic eye muscles. The cornea is also made up of dense regular connective tissue, but it is completely transparent. It is covered on both the inside and outside by an epithelia. The inner epithelial layer, corneal endothelium, is composed of simple squamous cells with special active sodium pumps that maintain the clarity of the cornea by keeping the water content of the cornea low. Because the cornea lacks blood vessels, it can be transplanted from one person to another without being rejected. The cornea lets light enter the eye, and is a major part of the light-bending apparatus of the eye. Imperfections in the cornea lead to visual abnormalities, some of which can be corrected using laser surgery to reshape the cornea. The vascular layer or uvea contains the dark pigment melanin. It consists of three parts: the choroid, which is rich in blood vessels that provide nutrition to all the layers of the eye. Its dark pigment helps to absorb light, preventing it from scattering and reflecting within the eye. Anteriorly, the choroid becomes the ciliary body that encircles the lens. It contains smooth muscle bundles called the ciliary muscles, which are important in controlling the shape of the lens so we can focus on things in the distance or up close. The ciliary body contains folds called ciliary processes. The ciliary processes secrete aqueous humor, which fills the anterior segment of the eye. The suspensory ligaments or ciliary zonule extend from the ciliary processes to the lens. The iris is the colored part of the eye and the only visible part of the vascular layer. The pupil is the round opening in the iris, which lets light enter the eye. The inner sensory tunic consists of two layers. The outer layer consists of pigmented epithelial cells, which are essential to maintain the health and function of the neural retina. The neural retina extends anteriorly to the ciliary body. The junction of the retina with the ciliary body is called the ora serrata, which literally means the sawtoothed margin. As mentioned in the previous slide, the iris is made up of two smooth muscle layers, the inner pupillary constrictor muscles which go around the pupil, and the pupillary dilator muscles which extend out radially. In bright light or when looking at something up close, the pupillary constrictor muscles contract, which narrows the opening of the pupil, thus reducing the amount of light striking the retina and preventing scatter. The pupillary constrictor muscles are stimulated by the parasympathetic division of the ANS. Conversely, in dim light or when looking at a distant object, the pupillary dilator muscles contract, making the pupil larger in order to let in more light. The pupillary dilator muscles are controlled by the sympathetic division of the ANS, so when an individual is scared or angry, the pupils dilate as well. At this point, we can describe a phenomenon referred to as accommodation. Accommodation occurs when we shift our gaze from distant objects to something up close. Light coming from close objects diverges as it approaches the eyes. To adjust the focal point and restore focus, three processes must occur simultaneously, and can be remembered by the three C's: accommodation of the lenses, constriction of the pupils, and convergence of the eyeballs. In accommodation of the lenses, the ciliary muscles contract, pulling the ciliary body toward the pupil, releasing tension on the suspensory ligaments. Contraction of the ciliary muscles is controlled by the parasympathetic fibers of the oculomotor nerves. The pupillary sphincter muscles of the iris reduce the size of the pupil, thereby preventing scattering of light. In other words, the most divergent light rays are kept from entering the eye. The accommodation pupillary reflex is also mediated by parasympathetic fibers traveling in cranial nerve 3. The eyes converge, meaning that the eyeballs rotate toward the object being viewed. When we are looking at an object in the distance, both eyes are directed either straight ahead or to one side to the same degree. But when we look at something close, our eyes are directed medially. The closer the object, the greater the degree of convergence. Try extending your arm in front of you with the index finger pointing toward your face. Keep the tip of your finger in focus as you touch your finger to your nose. You eventually go cross-eyed. Convergence of the eyes is controlled by somatic motor fibers of the oculomotor nerve. When looking at an object in the distance, the ciliary muscles are relaxed, keeping the suspensory ligaments of the lens taut. This flattens the lens. In accommodation of the lenses for near vision, the ciliary muscles contract, pulling the ciliary body toward the pupil, releasing tension on the suspensory ligaments which go slack. Contraction of the ciliary muscles is controlled by the parasympathetic fibers of the oculomotor nerves. Reading or studying A and P for a long period of time, causes the ciliary muscles to fatigue. This results in eye strain, which can make you feel tired. Some people get headaches or your vision may go blurry. At the same time the ciliary muscles are contracting, the pupillary sphincter muscles of the iris reduce the size of the pupil, thereby preventing scattering of light. In other words, the most divergent light rays are kept from entering the eye. The accommodation pupillary reflex is also mediated by parasympathetic fibers traveling in cranial nerve 2. Eye. The third event for focusing on something up close is convergence of the gaze. When we are looking at an object in the distance, both eyes are directed either straight ahead or to one side to the same degree. But when we look at something close, our eyes are directed medially. The closer the object, the greater the degree of convergence. Try extending your arm in front of you with the index finger pointing toward your face. Keep the tip of your finger in focus as you touch your finger to your nose. You eventually go cross-eyed. Convergence of the eyes is controlled by somatic motor fibers of the oculomotor nerve. The sensory tunic contains the retina. Recall that during embryological development of the brain, the retina is an outgrowth from the developing brain. Because it evaginates from the diencephalon, the retina is inside out with respect to the pathway of light entering the eye. In other words, the first-order neurons, which are the photoreceptors, are in the deepest layer of the retina. Incoming light has to pass through the other two layers in order to strike the photoreceptors. Conversely, visual information passes in the opposite direction to leave the eye encoded as action potentials via the optic nerve. The retina gets its blood supply from two sources. The outer third, containing the photoreceptors, is supplied by vessels in the choroid. The inner two-thirds is supplied by the central artery and central vein, which enter and leave the eye by coursing through the optic nerve and then radiate outward from the optic disc. Branches from these vessels ramify throughout the retina, providing a rich vascular network. The vessels are easily seen on examination using an ophthalmoscope, and their appearance can be of diagnostic value. For example, the blood vessels of people suffering from high blood pressure or diabetes will appear abnormal. Compare the appearance of the blood vessels of the two retinas shown here. The top picture is of a normal retina. Notice the optic disc from which the healthy retinal vessels radiate. The bottom picture is from a person suffering with diabetic retinopathy. Diabetic retinopathy is caused by damage to blood vessels of the retinas. The deterioration of the retinal photoreceptor layer is due to vascular damage, overgrowth and rupture of the retinal blood vessels. These abnormal vessels extend between the pigment epithelium and retina, resulting in blind spots. Diabetes also increases the risk of developing other eye diseases such as glaucoma and cataracts. The retina actually consists of two layers, the pigmented and neural layers. The pigmented epithelium is the outer layer. It is a single cell layer thick and abuts against the choroid. The pigment epithelial cells contain melanin. This black pigment absorbs light and prevents it from scattering in the eye. These cells are also phagocytic and function to remove dead or damaged photoreceptors, phagocytize photoreceptor discs, and store vitamin A. We will learn shortly that vitamin A is a nutrient needed by the photoreceptors to capture light. The pigment epithelium supports the retina physically and metabolically. If the neuroretina becomes detached from the pigment epithelium, the photoreceptors may die and leave behind a permanent blind spot if the two layers reattached. Laser or cryosurgery can reattach the neuroretina to the pigment epithelium. The most common cause of retinal detachment is a traumatic blow to the head or when the head stops moving suddenly and then is jar. Head in the opposite direction. Watch out bungee jumpers. The neuroretina consists of a 3-neuron chain. The first-order neurons are the photoreceptors, rods and cones. The bipolar cells are second-order neurons and the ganglion cells are the third-order neurons. The photoreceptors produce electrical signals in response to light, pass the signal to the bipolar cells, and then to the ganglion cells where action potentials are generated. Notice that light, indicated by the yellow arrow, passes through the retina to excite the photoreceptors, and flow of information occurs in the opposite direction. In addition to the 3-neuron chain, the retina also contains interneurons called horizontal and amacrine cells. These cells pass information laterally, so they are involved with modifying visual information before it leaves in the optic nerve. The photoreceptors are subdivided into outer and inner segments. The outer segment consists of a stacked disc made out of cell membrane. The membrane discs are embedded with the visual pigments. Photoreceptors are named rods or cones based on the shape of their outer segment. The inner segment is where the major organelles are found. It contains the nucleus, many mitochondria and an extensive Golgi apparatus. In addition to maintaining housekeeping functions and metabolism of the photoreceptor, the inner segment is where the photopigments are synthesized. The outer segments contain an array of visual or photopigments which change shape when they absorb light. The photopigments are embedded stacks of discs made out of plasma membrane. New discs are made at the proximal end of the outer segment from materials synthesized in the cell body. As new discs are made, they push the ones on top of them upward. The disc at the tip of the outer segment continually are shed and then phagocytized by the pigment epithelial cells. In rods, the new discs are assembled at night and are shed during the day. In cones, the outer segment are also removed and renewed by at the end of each day. The reason for this difference is because rods work mainly at night or in dim light, and cones work during the day or in bright light. Phototransduction is the process by which light energy is converted into a graded receptor potential and then ultimately into an action potential that is conducted to the brain via the optic nerve. The visual pigment of rods is called rhodopsin, from rhodo equals rose, and opsis equals vision, so named because it is deep purple in color. It consists of a large opsin molecule which is an integral membrane protein, and the light-absorbing part called retinal bound to its interior. When a photon of light contacts rhodopsin, retinal changes shape for the cis form to the trans form. It detaches from the opsin molecule. During this period, which takes milliseconds, the rhodopsin molecule is unable to respond to any more incoming photons, and is said to be bleached. In order for it to capture another photon, the retinal has to reattach to the opsin. This process is called regeneration and it can take minutes to complete. During the regeneration process, the transretinal is enzymatically converted back to the cis form with the expenditure of ATP. It then recombines with the opsin to form rhodopsin, which is now ready to repeat the process. There are 130 million photoreceptors per human retina, the majority of which are rods. Rods work in dim light, they are capable of responding to a single photon. Because of their sensitivity to light, they are great at detecting movement and for peripheral vision. The density of rods increases from the center of the retina towards the ora serrata. Although rods are very sensitive to light, they cannot detect color and cannot be used for focal vision. Try walking along a hallway or corridor. Keep your eyes fixated on your destination. What do you perceive out of the corner of your eyes? You can sense that you are moving with respect to the hallway, however you cannot clearly see anything attached to the walls. This is because many rods converge, are joined together via horizontal and amacrine cells, on a single ganglion cell. Cones, on the other hand, work in bright light, give us the ability to distinguish millions of colors and hues, and are used for high acuity vision. If you are reading the words on this slide, you are using your cones. There are about 10 million cones/retina. Cones increase in number from the peripheral retina towards the center of the visual axis. They greatly outnumber rods in a small area in the retina called the macula lutea, which means yellow spot. The macula lutea is in line with the visual axis. That's why when you want to look at something in detail, your extrinsic eye muscles change the position of your eyes, and the lens and pupil adjust their shapes and size. This directs and pinpoints the image on the macula lutea. Within the tiny macula lutea is a volcano-shaped region called the fovea centralis or central pit. The fovea centralis contains cones only, and the other neurons comprising the retina are moved off to the side. This area is devoted to the highest level of focal vision. Whereas many rods converged on a single ganglion cell, cones have a one-to-one connection within the retina. This means one cone synapses with one bipolar cell which synapses with a single ganglion cell. This diagram shows what is meant by convergence. Notice how several rods converge on a single bipolar cell and how several bipolar cells converge on a single ganglion cell. In reality, the degree of convergence is much greater than illustrated here. Now look at the green cone. It synapses with a single bipolar cell which synapses with a single ganglion cell. There is also no lateral convergence with amacrine or horizontal cells, so that the information gathered by cones is very precise. Our eyes respond to visible light. Notice that the electromagnetic spectrum extends from the very short gamma waves to the long radio waves. The wavelengths of the electromagnetic spectrum are indicated in nanometers. The spectrum of visible light constitutes only a small portion of this energy range, from 420 to 700 nanometers. Sensitivities of rods in the three cone types respond to the different wavelengths of the visible light. Although rods can respond to wavelengths of light corresponding to different colors, rhodopsin does not distinguish color. The cone opsins differ both from the opsin of the rods and from one another. The naming of cones reflects the color of light that each cone type absorbs best. Blue cones make up 16% of the total cone population. They respond maximally to wavelengths of around 420 nanometers. Green cones make up 10% and respond best to wavelengths of 530 nanometers. Red cones make up the vast majority or 74% of the three types. They respond to wavelengths at or close to 560 nanometers. Notice however, that the absorption spectra of the three cone types overlap. This gives us the ability to perceive intermediate colors and hues such as orange, yellow, and purple because different combinations of more than one type of cone occurs at the same time. We can use the colored shape shown here to demonstrate how our cones work to let us perceive different colors. For example, yellow light stimulates both red and green cone receptors, but if the red cones are stimulated more strongly than the green cones, we see orange instead of yellow. When all cones are stimulated equally, we see white. We can also use this picture of a green heart outlined in yellow to demonstrate bleaching of our cones that correspond to combinations of cones that let us see the two colors. Stare at the black dot in the middle of the heart shape for about 30 seconds. What's taking place is that you are bleaching out the cone combinations that yield yellow and green. Keep staring at the screen until the slide changes and don't move your eyes from the position they are in. While you are staring at the image, the retinal molecules bound to the opsins and cone combinations that correspond to yellow and green are changing from the cis form to the trans form in A, redetaching from their respective opsins. Thus, these cones can't respond to any more photons within these wavelengths and are said to be bleached. What does the heart image look like now? I see a pink heart outlined in blue. These are the colors complementary to green and yellow, which means what you are seeing is the result of cone combinations that did not absorb photons in the yellow and green range of wavelengths. The axons of ganglion cells leave the retina forming the optic nerves. Notice that there is a partial decussation of the fibers from each retina in the optic chiasm. Ganglion cell axons from receptors in the medial part of the retina cross to the opposite side, whereas fibers from the lateral retina do not cross. After leaving the optic chiasm, the fibers continue on via the optic tracts. Thus, each optic tract contains fibers from the lateral or temporal aspect of the eye on the same side and fibers from the medial, nasal, aspect of the opposite eye. In addition, the optic tracts carry all the information from the same half of the visual field. The optic tracts project posteriorly around the hypothalamus and send most of their axons to synapse with neurons in the lateral geniculate of the thalamus. The thalamic neurons are the fourth-order neurons in the visual pathway. Recall the first, second and third-order neurons were in the retina. The visual information proceeds posteriorly, forming massive optic radiations. These are the axons of the lateral geniculate neurons. The optic radiations terminate in the primary visual area in the occipital lobe where conscious perception of visual images, in other words, seeing occurs. Notice that some nerve fibers in the optic tracts send branches to the midbrain. These fibers end in the superior colliculi. Recall that the superior colliculi are visual reflex centers controlling the extrinsic eye muscle so that we can track objects in the visual field. Another small set of neurons send fibers to the pretectal nuclei which mediate pupillary light reflexes, and to the suprachiasmatic nucleus of the hypothalamus, which functions as a timer to set our daily biorhythms. Binocular vision is an important asset to predatory animals. Notice in the diagram that although both eyes are set anteriorly and look in the same direction, the visual fields of each eye is about 170 degrees, and they overlap quite a bit so that each eye sees a slightly different view of the same object. The visual cortex fuses the two slightly different images, which provides us with depth perception or three-dimensional vision. This gives us the ability to accurately locate objects. In other words, if we are reaching for a cup of coffee, we know just how far to extend our hand to grab a hold of it. When driving, Our depth perception lets us know about how far away a turning truck or a stopped vehicle is so that we can respond appropriately. Our eyes are best adapted for distant vision. The far point of vision is that distance beyond which no change in lens shape is needed for focusing. For the normal or emetopic eye, the far point is 20 feet. The closest point on which we can focus clearly is called the near point of vision, and it represents the maximum bulge the lens can achieve, which in the normal eye is about 4 inches. The near point gets farther away as we age because the lens loses its elasticity. That's why older people hold objects they want to look at or books they want to read at arm's length. This loss of lens accommodation is known as presbyopia, which literally means old person's vision. About 99% of visual problems are related to eyeball shape, meaning that the eye is too long or too short. Myopia or short vision occurs when distant objects are focused not on, but in front of the retina. Myopic people see close objects without problems because they can focus them on the retina, but distant objects are blurred, thus the common name for myopia is nearsightedness. Myopia typically results from an eyeball that is too long. Hyperopia or farsightedness occurs when the image is focused behind the retina. Hyperopic individuals can see distant objects perfectly well, however light from nearby objects are focused behind the retinal. Consequently, close objects appear blurry. Hyperopia usually results from an eyeball that is too short. Astigmatism results when there are unequal curvatures in different parts of the cornea or lens. This leads to blurry vision. Although there are many diseases of the visual system, we will consider 3 of the most common and most devastating eye diseases that affect our society. A cataract is a clouding of the lens that causes the world to appear distorted, like looking through a frosted glass. Sometimes cataracts can change the color perception of certain objects. Some cataracts are congenital, but most result from age-related hardening or thickening of the lens. Nowadays, cataracts are a common secondary consequence of diabetes mellitus. Other causes include heavy smoking and long-term use of steroids. Frequent exposure to sunlight can also cloud the lens. The lens helps to protect the retina by absorbing ultraviolet radiation. The direct cause of cataracts seems to be inadequate delivery of nutrients to the deeper lens fibers, resulting in clumping of the crystalline proteins. Cataracts can be surgically removed and an artificial lens can be implanted to save the person's eyesight. The anterior chamber of the eye lies between the cornea and iris. Aqueous humor, which is a clear fluid similar in composition to blood plasma, bathes and nourishes the lens and cornea, and helps to maintain proper intraocular eye pressure. It is produced by the blood capillaries of the ciliary processes in the posterior chamber, and circulates through the pupil to the anterior chamber. From there it drains into a trabecular network or venous sinus called the canal of Schlemm and is returned to the venous side of the circulation. Unlike the vitreous humor, aqueous humor is continuously secreted and is replaced every 90 minutes. Failure to drain properly results in excessive pressure in the anterior chamber, which could ultimately compress the retina and optic nerve. This condition is called glaucoma. The term glaucoma means vision growing gray, alluding to the progressive loss of vision. If not detected early, the eventual result is blindness. The most common treatment for glaucoma is to administer eye drops that increase the rate of aqueous humor drainage or decrease its production. Laser therapy or surgery is sometimes necessary to open up the canal or make an alternate route for the drainage of fluid. In dry AMD, small white or yellowish deposits, called drusen, form on the retina, beneath the macula, causing it to deteriorate or degenerate over time. The wet/neovascular type affects approximately 10 to 15% of individuals with AMD, but accounts for approximately 90% of all cases of severe vision loss from the disease. In wet AMD, abnormal blood vessels under the retina begin to grow toward the macula. Because these new blood vessels are abnormal, they tend to break, bleed, and leak fluid, damaging the macula and causing it to lift up and pull away from its base. This can result in a rapid and severe loss of central vision. This is particularly devastating because the macula contains most of our cones, which function in high acuity vision. Consequently, people with MD cannot focus on object. They try to read using their peripheral vision, but this area consists mainly of rods. Therefore their vision is fuzzy or non-existent. Although its cause is unknown, several new treatments are now available for wet AMD. This slide shows what the visual world would look like to individuals suffering from MD, cataracts, and glaucoma. Notice in ND, that the center of the visual field is obstructed and so patients can never focus on what they are trying to look at. Conversely, rods in the peripheral retina are damaged first in glaucoma, resulting in a loss of peripheral vision and a greatly reduced visual field.